Welcome, everyone, to this week's holiday edition of Military Trailblazer Office Hours. Thanks for taking time out of your Wednesday evening, especially tonight, because I know it's a holiday tomorrow, to spend it here in the spirit of community mentorship and learning. I'm your host, Dave Nava. I'm a lead solution engineer at Salesforce, and I'm a military trailblazer. Each week, as you're probably aware, we invite a co-host or sometimes co-hosts to take part in the conversation so we can leverage their experience, their expertise, and their unique perspectives. The focus for tonight's session is how to prepare for a career in consulting. And so I would like to welcome and briefly introduce our co-host for tonight's session, Brett Currier. Brett is currently a consulting associate at Huron. He's also the CEO and founder of Vetgigs, which he's going to chat about. It's an online talent marketplace that connects veterans to employers. Prior to his consulting career, Brett was a military policeman in the Army National Guard. It is awesome to have you here, Brett. Welcome.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, David. I'm really excited to speak with everyone. And I'm excited to see a few folks on the call who have already had a chance to meet.
Awesome. That is fantastic. Do you want to take a moment and kind of introduce yourself and share your professional journey, I guess, from the Army National Guard to include your work with Vetgigs?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. Thanks, David. So as you mentioned, I started my professional career in the Army. I spent 12 years in the Army and Army National Guard, most of that in the California Army National Guard as a military policeman. I was also a religious affairs NCO as well for another MOS, and my service included a tour in Iraq for Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation New Dawn. I also had quite a bit of time during my service where I was serving as an operations sergeant in a line MP unit. So most of the wildfires you saw on the news over the last 5 years in California, I was there moving the pieces around the chessboard, driving around, checking on my Joes at tactical control points, and sometimes working them with them. So that's where I kind of really started my military career. And I had actually almost the entire time I was at Deloitte Consulting, I was also in the California Army National Guard, so kind of juggling both. So those of you, who are still in, you may very well have that same experience too. And I'm happy to talk with you, outside of this, where if you kind of run into issues and balancing that, because it was definitely an adventure. But when I was at Deloitte Consulting, I was a tech consultant, and I worked primarily in the Workday space, but I also helped launch several different service lines at Deloitte Consulting, including their higher ed future of work service offering and their commercial talent acquisition future of work service offering. So with that, I helped CIOs and CHROs figure out how their workforce and workplace were all changing. And during that, I kind of started kicking around the idea of how do I help these CIOs and CHROs connect with the veteran talent, because they wanted to so bad, but they had a really hard time reaching qualified veteran talent. So I originally envisioned it as kind of a staffing firm, but realized that wasn't quite scalable. And I was spending a lot of time mentoring veterans, but wanted to come up with a technological solution to really help connect veterans with the resources available to them so much more. So I got the idea for Vetgigs when I was thinking about Upwork and Fiverr and how they, through their freelancer marketplaces, really efficiently connect the employee groups and employer groups well together. So with Vetgigs, it's an online freelancer marketplace for strictly for veterans, current service members, and military spouses who are working in the professional services space or just beginning to start their careers in the professional services space. So, one of the consulting paths you can go, aside from being an employee at a boutique firm, at a big consulting firm, or in an internal role as a Salesforce professional, is freelancing and working for yourself. And so I'll talk about the benefits and drawbacks of each a little bit later, and when I kind of get into my slides. But with Vetgigs specifically, we help enable freelancing. So we take some of the big pain points that come with freelancing and really smooth those out to help veterans and military spouses kind of take that power back into their own hands. So very happy to be here with you and talk with you and really to kind of pass on any bits of knowledge I can. And while I'm actually a Workday consultant myself, I'm quite familiar with the Salesforce space because a lot of my battle buddies went into the Salesforce route. And actually most of our freelancers right now on Vetgigs are Salesforce consultants because we work well with Maravis. So Very familiar with the different routes you can go, and familiar with how especially big four and boutique firms hire Salesforce consultants in addition to freelancers. So I'll talk to you about each one of those paths today.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro, Brett. And there's definitely some Merivets on the call, so that's awesome. All right. So for those folks that may be joining for the first time, welcome. Just a brief overview of what we do. It's essentially an informal get-together to gather with both military trailblazers and allies. Everyone's welcome to attend, to explore non-technical Salesforce career and branding related topics so that you can achieve your professional development and career related goals. As always, keep your eye on the chat during tonight's session, because I'll be posting things in there, and sometimes other folks will post as well. Links to opportunities for volunteering, for hiring, knowledge articles that I find on LinkedIn and things of that nature. And those will also be posted to the LinkedIn channel, or I'm sorry, to the YouTube channel as a document in case if you're watching this from the recording, in case you miss it, it's also there as well. So, if you have a question at any point during the session, more than happy to jump in and chat about those. Either raise your hand or you can type it in chat, and I'll be keeping my eye on chat to be able to pull those from the chat log and ask those for you. So with that in mind, before we jump over to the dialogue and open the floor for questions, Brett has some slides he'd like to present to kind of give you some context and background. And so I'll turn it back over to him.
All right. So, and I already introduced myself, so I'll just go briefly here. I'm going to talk quite a bit about my time at Deloitte Consulting when I'm talking about Big Four. But no, I actually did transition from Deloitte Consulting to Huron Consulting Group, which is not as much a boutique firm because it's still a billion-dollar company, but quite small compared to Deloitte. And it's a really good example of a specialist type firm because while they're quite large, they're large in two different areas: higher ed and healthcare primarily. So, they do have a lot of Salesforce consultants, and they're primarily in those two different areas. So within the overall consulting firm option, you can go pretty much like Big Four, a specialist firm, a big tech firm like Accenture, or kind of go into a specialist or boutique type role. And currently I'm a Workday consultant at Huron, and then run Vetgigs as well. So we can go into the next slide, David. Thanks. There are actually pretty much three different routes I'm going to talk about. The first is going into Big Four consulting, and I'll use that term kind of broadly. Big Four being, Deloitte, EY, KPMG, or PwC. But really, that would also include big tech consulting companies that aren't quite Big Four, like Accenture, or just the numerous others out there you could go as well. All of whom, hire quite a few Salesforce consultants. There's also the Hurons and other type specialist companies out there. I'm also going to talk about the route you can go as an internal Salesforce employee. And while you aren't technically a consultant in that route, you are very much a specialist within the company, helping them maintain their system. So you kind of operate as an internal consultant with a lot of autonomy. And so actually, if we could go back one slide before this. Okay. Perfect. And then the last role I'm going to talk about is freelancing. And that is really what we specialize in with Vetgigs. And it's interesting because freelance consultants actually work quite a bit with the first two in big consulting firms on big projects and in internal roles, because when the Big Fours or Accenture or even Salesforce goes to market on a big multi-million-dollar implementation, they often can't staff all the people themselves, or it's not worth it to staff all the people themselves because they have really key team members they need to spread across the board on multiple different projects. And they fill in the gaps with freelancers or contract consultants who are really just there to work on project work, and that's it. So I'll talk about some of the benefits and drawbacks on each, and feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions, because you very well may have some as they come up. Cool. So why don't we, and actually I kind of quote Pepsi, a famous study by Pepsi a little bit on the top. And that's that, Pepsi had this big multi-million-dollar study to find the perfect Pepsi. And the main quote at the end of the study that summed everything up was, there's no perfect Pepsi, only perfect Pepsis, which means there's not just one end result that's right for everyone. It's what's right for you at the time and with your own personal preferences. So, I'm going to talk about the benefits and drawbacks of each of these, but know that one of these could be right for you at any given time. It's really going to depend on your values and what you're looking for and what's really important for you when you're, looking at your career options. So certainly no one option better than the other here. We can go to the next slide. Thanks. So with a large consulting firm, some of the big benefits you can experience are branding. So, working at a big four, Salesforce as a consultant, working with external folks, or some of the specialist firms as well, working on big Salesforce projects, they're going to give you great brand recognition. It's almost like, being a Green Beret or whatnot. Like, everyone knows what a Green Beret is for the most part. Everyone knows what like a Navy SEAL is, just like when you have Deloitte or McKinsey or Salesforce on your resume. Everyone in that world knows what that is. So it's just really strong brand recognition that people immediately relate with on your resume. Also, experience is a really big piece of it too. I like to think of, your regular job experience, like brewed coffee, whereas work at a consulting firm is very potent, like espresso or cold brew. It's very concentrated because you get exposed to so many different things all the time. You may be brand new on a project one day, and your project principal or partner will come to you and say, hey, I need you to go and become an expert on X, Y, and Z. And, we're going to introduce you as a SMET about this to the client in 2 weeks or next week. And, it's up to you to go learn it, which can be kind of daunting and scary, but you're also learning so much so fast. And, not only will the clients be leaning on you to know this stuff, but other people on your project too. So you may be drinking from a fire hose all the time, but within 4 to 6 months, you're going to feel like you've been there for 1.5 years because you're just soaking up so much knowledge all the time. And, it can be a bit draining, definitely, but also, it's just very, very potent experience. And that's why in a lot of the job descriptions or job postings you'll read, people say, oh, consulting experience a plus, because they're looking for someone who can be thrown into the deep end and survive and thrive. So it's a really, really good experience there. And I put something on the bottom here, a good starting pay. And I'll qualify starting pay because consulting firms very much want to pay to attract you to the company. But being peak efficiency organizations, they will only pay you what they feel they need to retain you as talent. And sometimes that's not as much as you would think. So, it can be really good, but what you'll find those who make the most in consulting do is they spend a few years at each different firm and, sometimes circle back several times because, when I left from Deloitte to Huron, they offered me quite a bit to make that transition. And since I've been at Huron for a few months, I've had other firms reaching out to try and attract me. It's the consulting way. They need to pay to attract talent, and then they'll do their best to retain you within reason. But it's you can definitely expect to come in at a very, very competitive starting salary, even if that's your first job in consulting. So we can jump to the next question here. Or next slide, thank you. So a day in the life you could expect at a Big Four or other large consulting firm. You may start, depending on your project and everything, around 8 for the first half an hour or so, just kind of catch up on emails, work on some of your administrative items. Then your first half of the meeting, you could expect client meetings where you are meeting with the clients to do requirements gathering, which for those of you who haven't worked in consulting before or on tech project is going and having joint design sessions with the client where you're talking to them about what their needs are, how they conduct their business, so you can figure out how you need to configure the system you're implementing to meet those business needs. Things like that. Also figuring out kind of what their future needs are so you can start thinking about their overall system architecture, things like that. If you're later in the stages of the project, it may be testing sessions where you're doing testing design or actually going through and kind of guiding them through testing or doing training as well. You may have a really quick lunch. I know quite a few consultants tend not to take lunch, or they'll have lunch right at their desk just because there's generally so much to do. And then between 12:30 and 1700, you're knocking out last pieces of your deliverable in between other meetings. It can be really tough sometimes on projects because your whole day is stacked up with meetings, and then you still need to get all your work done as the follow-ups from those meetings. And then one thing to note too that's highly different with big consulting firms is after all of your project is done, which may be 40 to 50 hours a week, you still have to do proposals and initiatives. So it's very important for consulting firms to continue to sell work just as much as to actually implement and complete the work they've already sold. So clients will send out what's called RFPs, requests for proposals, and it's up to the staff within the consulting firms to work with partners to actually respond to those requests for proposals. And so you may over several weeks or even several months fill out these proposals and send it into the client, specifying the work you'll do, how much, the key staff, and how you'll differ from the competitors. There's also a lot of initiatives, which can be doing things like building out methodology that you use to take to market, or even things as simple as planning holiday parties. But it's all extra time that gets stacked onto your workday. So it could easily take a 40 or 50 hour work week and turn it into a 50, 60, 70 hour work week, depending. And your experience and the length of your work weeks, I would say, is highly dependent too on your leadership. Every project is going to be different. The place you could be forced to go, who you're going to be working with on the project, and the expectations of the leadership. Very similar to the military. You could have a great command structure. You could have a really crappy command structure. So it's tough to gauge the overall feel and expectation of the firm in general, because every project can vary so very much. So yeah, definitely all things to think about. And any questions before I move on to kind of what some of the internal consulting roles look like? Yeah, Amber.
Hey, thanks so much, Brett, for being here. Yeah. So I have a question. Again, as just going through Maravis and still working toward my first certification, this does not sound like something, right, I should step into. So down the road, I mean, what have you seen? What's been your experience as Salesforce folks going to be consultants? Because it sounds like it's definitely go, right? Like, I need to eat, so I definitely have to take lunch every day. But I mean, really, what type of knowledge, right? You hear consultant and you hear that thrown around a lot, but at what point does somebody really have and capture that knowledge to say, hey, I'm knowledgeable enough to come in to do these projects, right? And to run with them and, can validate those billing hours. So what's your experience? Just curious.
Really, really great question, Amber. And I would say it varies quite a bit. Like, I'll give you the most broad consulting answer you'll hear on so many things. It depends. So, I think if you get thrown on the deep end quite a bit on your initial project, and when I get thrown in the deep end, I don't mean necessarily like you're a really functional person and they throw you on a project where you're coding or whatnot, and that's not your forte. So you're just drowning the whole time. I just mean like you're constantly given stretch roles where you're comfortable enough to thrive, but challenged enough where you're learning quite a bit. You may feel comfortable getting in and kind of launching into other steps in your career within a year or two, it really just there's so many factors that it depends. But I don't want to give you the idea that consulting is necessarily all bad and all like difficult. It can be a really good option. It definitely can. And I think part of it, you need to draw your own boundaries. That's really helpful when you come in. So, my first project, I had a principal or a senior manager actually, who would call me at like 3 a.m. and expect me to pick up. And what I absolutely should have done is been like, no, Brian, I'm sorry. Like, that is not okay. And, I turn my phone off at 10 o'clock because I need sleep and we can talk in the morning. But I was a brand new analyst. I was still in the Army. And so, the command hierarchy was like everything to me. But, you can draw boundaries. That is okay. And that is expected. And that will help you quite a bit. Maybe, and I would say it's becoming more and more acceptable and like understandable to initially draw your boundaries with your projects and say what's important to you. So if you have to drop and pick up your kids from school, you tell your project team that's something you have to do, and they will more than likely be well understanding about that, as long as you're getting your work done and everything at other times. One thing to be aware of is travel. And that's an important part with consulting too, when you're looking at consulting firms. Some do no travel right now with COVID. Some do it at your own discretion, and you need to make sure you're asking that question when you're interviewing as well. But some can still be really flexible with you. David.
Yeah, if I could just weigh in briefly from a Salesforce perspective, specifically a personal one, to answer, Amber, your question. I think, if you're sitting there and you're thinking, oh gosh, consultants have to know everything, I don't know if this is the career path for me, I would absolutely say that's not the case. In my experience, I was a volunteer or a nonprofit cloud admin for about 10 months. And then as part of an internship leaving the military, I was thrown onto a multi-million-dollar project as a junior solution architect for a consulting firm, and off to the races. And so to Brett's point, yeah, the learning curve is steep, but as long as you love to learn, as long as you've selected an organization that has great mentorship resources, right? They're not going to throw you on a project and expect you to perform outside of your current experience level without oversight. And as long as you know where to go to get the resources, which we all do, there's tons of resources in the Trailblazer community, tons of system documentation, then you'll be totally fine. And so, I completed that internship, having never been a consultant before, and they immediately hired me. And then I continued on that project for the next year, got so much experience from consulting with the entire platform and all the related clouds, that I was able to then leverage that position to get hired at Salesforce. And so while the learning curve is steep, the rewards are also higher, because you're learning at a much greater pace. Employers recognize that, they want you on their team. So it's definitely something you can do. And put it in this context, the Hiring Our Heroes Fellowship, right? It's a 12-week paid program. And at the end of the 12 weeks, those companies have a 75 to 85% chance of hiring those folks as consultants. If someone who's brand new to the ecosystem, who has their admin cert, can learn how to be a consultant in 12 weeks, you absolutely can too. I would just kind of put a bow on it to say, just pick a good organization that has a great training program and will provide you with the mentorship resources that you need to be successful.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Thank you both for that. That's great insight. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And, there's so much we bring to the table as veterans that I think poise us very well for success in consulting. To David's point, we know where to go for resources. Like, that's one of the first things we learn is, not necessarily the material, but like, okay, where do I go for the right answers? You understand who your SMEs are and who you can go to for support and help. And we build mentorship. And also the mentorship is something we have so much as veterans too, because even without the formal mentorship programs, I know that I can, even when I'm like looking for a job, I go to the target organization's LinkedIn, find the veterans there, and I'll reach out to them and be like, hey, would you be willing to talk to me? And it's so powerful to have that. So, Megan, I see you raise your hand.
Yes. So how would you go about asking the right questions in an interview to find out about that work-life balance and the culture for going to pick up your kids or eating lunch?
Yeah.
things like that. Like, what are some good examples that you have learned?
Really, really good question. And something I definitely experienced myself when I was preparing to leave Deloitte and I was interviewing at 5, 6 different places. And I would recommend coming up with, before you even start to look at individual companies, make a list of the things that are really important to you. Maybe it's like, oh, you mentioned, I have to pick up and drop off my kids. For me, travel was a really big concern because I traveled almost full time for about 5 years at Deloitte, and it burnt me out. I didn't even realize it was happening, but I got super burnt out and pretty jaded really quickly, and it was just not sustainable. And when I finally got a break during COVID and I didn't travel for over a year, I realized that, oh man, I definitely don't want to go back to full-time travel again. So, that was a question I brought up. The other thing for me was the ability to freelance and have work outside of my company. With Big Four consulting firms, they often have so many functions that they don't want you doing anything other than working there because it's too much risk of conflict. But with other companies, like Huron only does consulting, so they don't have to worry as much about conflicts. But to answer your question, Megan, what I did is I came up with my list of different things that were really important and kind of must-haves and would like to haves for me. And then I just made sure to kind of bring those up in interviews. So I asked, when I was traveling, I'm coming from an organization where I had to travel full time, and I'm willing to travel as needed, like when we really need to. But, I wouldn't want to travel any more than, 1 or 2 weeks every couple months. And, is that something that you think would be acceptable? And, we just had a very open, honest conversation about that. I think it's important to make sure they don't come off as entitled, because you don't want to come in and be like, these are my demands. But a good interview is going to be not just them viewing you as a fit for the company, but making sure that company is a good fit for you too. And it was definitely a warning sign for me if I was interviewing a company and they didn't kind of have that same mentality as well. So yeah, but really starting off with like the core values, I would say, is what's important for you is a really, really good start.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the great question. Kayla.
Hi, Brett, thank you. I am enjoying this so much and so grateful that you're here because I am coming from a background as a French teacher for several years, and I just learned what a consultant was and still figuring that out actually only a few months ago. And one thing that kind of concerns me, besides like thinking about the work-life balance and how to find a really good fit, is as a new Salesforce aspiring professional, just getting the first cert, working on their second one, trying to learn as fast as they can. This concept of utilization and billable hours, this is all new to me. And so that's kind of my background of my thinking. So my question is kind of like, what do you do, or how should you think about it if you're really concerned that when it comes to listening to the needs of the company that you're consulting with, and you need to help with building these configurations, and being a new person, that might take a long time just to like go and read all the help articles, hit the trail. Like the motivation is not the problem. It's just this is going to take time to figure it all out and execute it and do it. And how would you manage that, I guess, when you're also trying not to work more than like 40 hours a week? I mean, with understanding that, okay, sometimes maybe you have to work 50 hours or what have you, but how would you manage being new, learning billable hours and not burning out and working 50 hours a week every week?
Yeah. So first off, you're not alone there. And I wouldn't worry at all about coming from a career path so far as different as being a French teacher to going into consulting, because so many of the consultants I've worked with have had those really diverse backgrounds. You know, I have someone on my project right now. He's one of the best analysts we have, and he just came from being a math teacher. And, you know, I've talk to folks with philosophy degrees, people with no college degrees, which is always kind of funny when they're working in higher ed as a consultant. But, you know, there's just, everyone comes from different backgrounds and we all bring different things to it. So, you know, your diverse background, you know, is just going to add all the more to it. And, you know, that's great. On the other part of your question, when you're talking about learning the company, learning the industry, and learning the product all at once, you're right. It is totally going to be drinking from a fire hose before. And I've been there, but I will tell you, it gets rapidly easier because you're going to start to get to know the company and learn the company policies. And you're going to start to learn the industry by working with people working in it. And, you know, as you start to learn, you're always going to be learning the product to an extent because there's always more to know. But like, as you start to learn each one of those different things, like as you learn the company, it's like you hit a new gear on your bike and it's like, okay, I'm picking up momentum now. And it's like a little bit easier. And then you start learning the industry and some of its ins and outs. And it's like, oh man, I just hit another gear. It just got a little bit easier. I'm having to put in less effort to go faster. And it's going to continuously get better and better and better like that. So there will be, like, the first few months are probably going to be pretty tough, but you'll get there. As you start to learn new things, you know, you're going to start getting templates for the things you're doing. And that's going to make things like writing emails and doing decks and things like that. It's going to make things continuously easier, and you're going to have to put in less effort to do it. So you're going to find your days are going to get rapidly shorter as you build up those assets, both knowledge-based and like template-wise and whatnot as well. So yeah, I think you're thinking about the right things, but don't worry, it gets better and better. So
thank you.
I think
I'm so glad to
regardless of what role you're looking for, and it's no different with consulting. Obviously, in our industry, continuous learning, continuous improvement is extremely important. And so, you know, in a consulting career where you are only probably able to bill the customer for 40 hours per week, you do have to allot time either before or after work for that learning above and beyond that 40. And so to Brett's point, I think you can probably expect to work more than 40 hours, at least initially, until you get the feel for that. One of the ways that I managed it, Kayla, was I would get up earlier than my coworkers, and I would study for a couple hours before the workday began. And that allowed me to work the 40 hours for the customer, and also to be able to improve my skills and be able to keep pace with the platform. So just a thought is to carve out some of that learning time in your day, every day if you can, to build your skills.
Yeah.
Thank you for that advice. And I love the bicycle analogy and all of that. It's very valuable to me. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And, I think David shared my LinkedIn. Feel free and give me a holler on LinkedIn, any of y'all. And, I talk to vets almost every day, just kind of talking to folks, mentoring, whether they're interested in freelancing or not. You know, I firmly believe we're a community, and we grow stronger when we work with each other because we're always sharing resources and whatnot. And, even if you don't have kind of any resource to share with me right now, I very well maybe come across a veteran in like 6 months, a year, who's in the Salesforce space or whatnot. They really want to talk with another veteran who's, been in it just for a little bit and starting off. And so you'll be able to do some mentorship for them too, and pass it on. So we're a really strong community, and we're stronger when we come together. So don't hesitate to reach out via LinkedIn. I'll send you my Calendly invite, and that way you can book time on my calendar anytime you want. So. Yeah. David, do you want to go to the next slide? Thank you. So an internal role, some of the things you can expect are increased quality of life, more of a 9-to-5 schedule. You have the benefits of being a specialist. And so not in my experience, well, in the experience of like my coworkers and folks who I know who work internal roles as Salesforce people, they're like, honestly, my boss and my department have no idea really what we do. And so, it's like, all right, we need to do X, Y, and Z, and they leave me to go do it. And I get to, suggest improvements, do different things, but it's way like really high autonomy, good quality of life, pretty like experience. I think really varies on the company in general. Often pretty competitive pay overall. And I would say when you are moving from a consulting role, you're a lot more attractive for these positions too. So a lot of companies hire their Salesforce folks from consulting firms, or if they'll hire a freelancer for that role, if it works out well, then they convert them into a W-2 employee. So that definitely happens as well. And we can go to the next slide, David. So kind of a sample day you can expect here, maybe showing up at 9, from 9 to 10:30, kind of working on admin stuff, reviewing your day, maybe working on projects as they come up. 10:30 to 12, we're working on reporting and functionality, identifying how you can enhance operations and give better data views for leadership. You may have a lot of the folks I know internal roles, they often have lunch brought in for their teams. And so they encourage them to have lunch at the office and meet with other teams, have that cross-pollination across teams. And then the rest of the day, you're looking at kind of meetings and doing planning and execution. Obviously, it's going to vary widely across your different like employers and teams, but from what I've seen, it tends to be a lot more 9-to-5 type roles, especially at startups and whatnot, where they're using Salesforce being their focus. And we can go to the next slide. So as a freelancing consultant, like I said, you're not often just working by yourself on professional services. You're often being brought in as part of an overall implementation, upgrade, or other type role. The quality of life really varies, but one of the key differences between a freelancing consultant and working at a consulting firm is you don't have all the extra stuff. You have your 40 or 50 hours of billable work a week, and you're getting paid for every one of those hours. So, you don't have a traditional salary. You're basically working under your own company, but you may have one client where you're doing 40 hours a week and you're like, hey, I get an extra 10, 15 hours a week I can work. So you have another client that you're doing 15 hours a week for. And then all 55 of those hours you're getting paid for it, but none of them are having you work on sales stuff or initiative things because they don't want to pay you $110 an hour to do those different things. They have employees to work on that. So your work is strictly to Salesforce, project related work, and then you clock off. So you have no other expectations because they have to pay you for that. So your experience is going to be different because you're just focusing on project work, but you have the choice. You're effectively your own boss. You choose the clients you have, the projects you work, and also you choose how you progress. If you're at Deloitte, for example, and you're a Salesforce admin, and then you pick up a UX designer or architect certification, they don't necessarily have to pay you more. They may and likely will over time, but you're not going to see when you pick up a new certification that translate to directly new income. Whereas if you're a freelancing consultant and you pick up a new certification and have a year of experience or whatnot, you can directly justify billing, your billing rate going from $55 an hour to $75 an hour, because now you have a higher marketable value and your market value goes up. So what you're billing new clients can go up commensurately as well. And you have control what you charge them, what you don't. So, you have that ultimate control over your lifelong earning potential. So that's any kind of questions there on the difference between those. All right, and we can go to the next slide. So a sample day at work as a freelancer, you may decide to start working really anytime you want because you're a freelancing consultant. So your client may say, we want you to work online between these certain hours. But if not, it's just you doing your work when you decide you need to do your work. A lot of that's going to be driven around client meetings and whatnot as well. But once you sign off or once you finish your billable work, you're done. They're not going to have you work on any other things as well. So we can go to the next slide. So some preparation. You maybe, I heard some of your thoughts before, how do I think about getting into consulting? What are some of the conversations I can have? So some of the different pieces of learning, and just before I kind of jump into that, it can be really difficult to break into consulting, but you already have so many things going for you. Y'all are veterans. I mean, you have so much experience to fall back on. You're not coming in fresh out of college. You have tremendous experience you've already had. And so it's just a matter of translating that experience so employers see that as relevant. But you already built up a just league of different soft skills, which are really huge. In addition to some of the direct hard skills you can translate as well. But you also have that really powerful network we talked about and really strong communities. So as far as the different learning you can do, start studying up on the SDLC, Systems Development Lifecycle. Y'all are probably already fairly familiar with that, but just understand it as a concept. Understand the difference between waterfall and agile implementation methodologies and kind of what kind of hybrid look like. But what's most important is to just understand each of the different stages in it, because no matter which technology you're using, whether it's Salesforce, Workday, ServiceNow, whatever, the one commonality when implementing is they all use the SDLC in some form. And whichever implementation methodology you're using, they all have the same steps in the SDLC, maybe just in different orders. So really important. Next is framework thinking, because that's going to benefit you, not just in your interviews, but how you're thinking through your design sessions and other conversations with the client. Basically being able to think through methodically your approach to questions. So you don't kind of have a shotgun approach, but it's very systematic and orderly, collecting the right information in the right order of importance from the clients. That'll go a really long way for you in your career. And it also helps out with case interviews as well. Case interviews are going to be important when you're going for a role as an employee at a consulting firm. And so there's two kinds of case interviews. You have your, you have your behavioral interviews, and you have your more technology related or strategy related case interviews. And I could have a whole talk on this in particular, but feel free and schedule time if you have questions. And there's a really good book that helped me on it called Case Interview Secrets. And that just kind of helped me think through some of the different ways. That I think is more related to strategy and operations case interviews, but it's kind of a similar approach to thinking through how you answer it, the behavioral part of it. And then we can also talk about different frameworks for approaching it question-wise and whatnot for the technology side. But it's definitely a barrier into getting into consulting. So one you got to study and prepare for. Next is the behavioral interviews, and we've probably all done behavioral interviews at some point. It's the questions, why choose Deloitte? Tell me about yourself. What are 3 strengths you have? What are 3 weaknesses you have? All those basic questions. And you can generally find those on Glassdoor to help kind of prepare and practice. The last one you guys are already doing, it's certifications. So y'all have or are working on your Salesforce certifications, which goes a long way. Certified Scrum Master, another one you can do. It helps make you stand out as well. And some of the other things is networking. We already talked about that. My recommendation to people is never just blindly apply for jobs. The applying on a website is kind of a black hole because they get so many, even in a really hot job market right now. It's still very less than 3% of people get jobs through just applying on the site. So, instead of doing that, use people in your network who already work there and talk to them, or build people into your network by reaching out, like checking out their LinkedIn, seeing which veterans work there or which of your college alumni work there, and just shoot them a message and say, hey, I'm also a veteran. I'm interested in this company. Would you mind having a brief call with me and talking about it? Like almost everyone I know, when they get one of those people reaching out to them on LinkedIn, they reply, because especially big consulting firms, it's like big referral money. If you get hired and they gave you an employee referral, they could get up to $10,000 or more from referring you. So they are heavily incentivized to do employee referrals. And then look for force multipliers. So reach out to recruiters, and you don't necessarily need to personally reach out to recruiters, but I have some pretty sneaky AI tools that work really well to actually get recruiters to come look at your resume or come look at your LinkedIn profile. There are tools like Octopus, which is a tool that basically can like go and visit people's profiles for you based on a certain search criteria you set up on LinkedIn. And if you just search like talent acquisition for the target companies you want, it'll go and look at a different person's profile every 30 to 60 seconds. And then you'll wake up in the morning after it's been running all night and you're like, oh man, I got like 10 friend request or connection requests from recruiters. So while you're actually reaching out to people yourself, pushing yourself onto people, you're then using tools like that to pull them into you as well. So really, really helpful. I just threw a bunch of information at you guys again, so I will stop here and just, we go to the next slide and I'll just open it up for questions. And yeah, just feel free to check out Vetgigs as well, www.vetgigs.com. Even if you're not interested in freelancing right now, you can create a free profile with all, same information you have on your resume and LinkedIn, and it'll automatically notify you when someone posts a job that matches your skill sets, and you can just keep an eye out on what's on the market. So it just kind of allows you to help keep your finger on the pulse. But yeah, please also follow us on social media if you're interested, and feel free to reach out to me anytime. I am more than happy to be a resource for any and all of you. Or any other veterans and male spouses, as well. So we're a big community, and I'm very happy to be a part of it and help y'all out.
I appreciate the presentation, Brett. Thanks very much.
Yeah, absolutely. To answer your question, Stephen, it is limited to veterans and military spouses and current service members. So we're not open to civilians at this time. At some point, we may open up to veteran dependents, but right now, strictly veterans, current servicemen, and military spouses.
If we can take go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I'm a veteran with the Australian Army, but I'll be moving to the US next year. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, if this applies for me or not.
Cool. Yeah. So this is actually the first time this has come up. Someone brought it up to me hypothetically once, and I was like, I don't know if we're even going to get that coming through. So currently we're just open to US service members and veterans, but follow us on social media. We very well may change that sometime in the future. But the reason we have that is because there's a lot of, laws that make it so states and federal agencies are incentivized to hire veteran subcontractors or veteran contractors. We may change that in the future though. So yeah, thank you for the great question, and keep in touch because we may change that going forward. I'll caveat that by saying, please do reach out to me on LinkedIn directly, because while the platform itself may not be open to that, I constantly am talking with CHROs and CIOs who are looking to hire folks in general. And while we may not be able to put you directly on the platform, I very well may be able to set you up with a gig outside the platform through our partners.
That's awesome.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
So folks, we got about 6-7 minutes left if you want to pose your questions. I don't see any hands raised or any questions in chat right now, but Brett, I've actually got one for you. In your slides, and those were awesome, by the way, I appreciate it. You had talked about how entry-level candidates can stand out in the consulting job market, and you talked about certifications and upskilling. So I guess for you, how did you prepare for your consulting career, and what did you specifically do to stand out?
Yeah, really great question. So one of the things I did is I picked up a certification. I had an interview actually that was going really well with a consulting firm, and the senior director I was meeting with was like, Brett, I think it's great. I'm going to preview for the next interview, but I'll tell you that the next person you interview with may not be as understanding that while you have a great business background, you don't have any tech background. I was like, I know, admittedly, I don't. And she's like, all right, here's what you want to do. Go out and, get any kind of certification or class you can take on like Scrum, Agile methodology, or this or that. And if you can get like a Scrum Master certification, like it's easy, like you'll get it quick and it will instantly round out your resume. So I went back, I found one I could do online, and I took what should have been like a 2-week course in one night online before my next interview. And it helped me get into Deloitte. So it was, really helpful. So the certifications, you're getting Salesforce, which are way more powerful than, Scrum Master certification, but any of those like certifications really help. Another thing, which I can't stress enough, is directly translating your experience from the military, because you should not be coming in as a intro, like college hire candidate. You have so much experience you bring to the table, whether you were a specialist grunt in the infantry or whether, you taught French and like were a French translator or something in the military. Even if you don't think those skills translate, trust me, these soft and hard skills you picked up in the military do translate to consulting. You have so much professional life you are bringing to the table that should have a value placed on it. So spouse, yes, thank you, David. Spouse skills translate too. Like no one's coming in as never having a job before. Like you've had jobs, you have experience as a military spouse too. You're exposed to so many different things too in that military world that you have life experience to bring to the table. So take that experience and translate it into language that if you are the recruiter hiring for that position, what would that relevant experience look like? One tip for that is looking at the job posting. Another is talking to people at that company, especially in that area, and saying like, what does relevant experience look like for this? And then directly translating, like for instance, if you are a platoon sergeant in the Army, don't put platoon sergeant, don't put sergeant first class. Your recruiters aren't going to know what that means. Put cross-functional like manager or cross-functional like internal consultant, something like that. It doesn't matter that wasn't your real title. If that's effectively what your job was in the military and you can articulate your position as that, that's what matters. And that if you don't do that, they're going to view you as essentially a college hire coming in as entry level, when really maybe you should be coming in a step above that. So happy to talk about that more too. If you want to, set up some time with me, we can kind of talk about that and what that would look like for you.
Thanks, Brett. I appreciate that. Before we close, we got a couple more minutes left. I wanted to throw it open for one more question, and if not, I have one. But obviously, you guys get first go. So, any last questions for Brett? All right, I will ask mine then. Brett, what are some things that, let's say you've gone through the Hiring Our Heroes Fellowship, or you've stepped on to a team at Deloitte. What are some things you can do in your first 90 days as a consultant to really, rise above your your peers, those that have also joined with you, and carve a niche for yourself at that new firm or at your new firm?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Thanks for that question. So one of the things, regardless of the firm, I think you could do is go in and understand the resources they have available at that firm. Things like, do they have a template bank? We talked about that in your question, Kayla. When understanding what resources the firm has available to accelerate your growth and your capabilities. Also understanding who the power players are. Like, I don't just mean the CEO and C-suite, but understand, who's running the projects, who's selling the work, who is doing different key things in the firm, so you can start understanding how you can provide value to them. One of the best ways you can network inside a new company is offering value. So if that one of the principal partners at the firm is really big in sales, and you've had some experience on RFP responses, or even you're interested in learning about that, reach out to them. And when you reach out for a virtual coffee chat or something, be like, hey, Raj, I would love to, I know you're really involved in sales. I would love to help you out. Do you have any proposals going on right now that I could jump in on and learn? I've done this before that I think could really help, or I haven't done it, but I'm really willing to learn. And when you get a chance to work with them and show them your chops, they're going to be like, oh yeah, Steven, Nick, Kayla, whoever, I really like working with them. It was great. I'm going to make sure I pull them in on this next engagement. And they're going to want to take you with them everywhere they go. Some of you may have experienced that in the military, where you worked really well with a leader. And so, when that commander took a new post, they're like, yeah, I'm taking you. You're going to be my XO. You're going to be my ops sergeant, or you're going to be my driver, my gunner, whatever, So it's the same thing in consulting. Like, people like working with people they know they work well with, and they know make them look good. So network by providing value, not just network by like going in and saying, what can you do for me? It's like, what can I do for you? And they're going to want to take you with you everywhere.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much, Brett. And folks, we're at time, but before we do close, I wanted to thank Brett for an hour of awesome learning about consulting career paths. It was a fantastic presentation. So thanks very much, Brett.
Yeah, thank you, David. This is a pleasure for me as well. And I hope to keep in touch with y'all. Thank you so much for the great questions and for this awesome participation. It was a fun group.
Absolutely. And thank you to everyone for making time on your Wednesday evening. I know it's a holiday tomorrow, so please enjoy your holiday, and we will see you next week. Thanks so much, everybody.